This is part 3 of Chapter 51's lecture, and we left off discussing the learned behavior of a digger wasp. So, as you remember, the digger wasp brings its prey, like this one is here, and leaves it by the nest, and then goes through this fixed action pattern where it's going to go into its burrow or its nest, clean it up, and then come back out to get its insect that's left there, its food. But the part of this behavior that is not innate is and is actually a learned behavior is the ability of the digger wasp to actually locate its nest. So Tinberger studied these wasps, and he discovered that when a wasp leaves the nest to go hunting, she'll cover up the entrance with sand. And then when she returns, she flies directly to this hidden nest, despite the presence of hundreds of other nests in the area. So in order to do this, the digger wasp uses landmark orientation, which is a form of cognitive mapping where the insect is able to make a neural representation of the spatial relationships between objects in the surroundings and the actual location of this burrow. So there is both learning in this behavior and innate or instinctive behavior. So when we think of learned behavior, we think of it as associative learning. So it's associating the behavior with something else. And we break up associative learning into two different types. The two classical types, actually classical conditioning, which is the Pavlovian conditioning that you've most likely heard of. Pavlov did his famous experiment with the dog and ringing a bell. That's classical conditioning. The other type is operant conditioning, which is more characterized by trial and error learning. So that's associating a behavior with a reward or associating behavior with a punishment. For example, a rat running through a maze would be operant conditioning, where it's learning over time to associate the patterns to follow in order to get the reward of food at the end. The difference with classical conditioning, let's see here. So this is our operant here. This is another example where the mouse is learning to associate pressing the lever with the reward of getting food. So again, associative learning is, in this case, operant conditioning, and it's associating a reward with its actual behavior. The classical conditioning is, again, the most commonly associated with Pavlov, who was the scientist who did a lot of testing and actually discovered this type of behavior. And he did this by ringing a bell. So he took what is a naturally occurring behavior. A dog sees food and starts to salivate. And then what he did is he started to ring a bell at the same time as he showed the food, so that the dog then learned to associate ringing the bell with food. And so what would happen is the behavior that was originally an innate behavior, which was salivating at the sight of food, became a learned behavior when the salivation would occur with just the ringing of a bell. So it's taking something that is innate, like salivating, and then associating a different stimulus, like a ringing bell, which normally would have been neutral, with that innate behavior. So that's classical conditioning. One of the things with learned behavior is the problem of habituation. And that's when there's a loss of response to the stimulus. And we think of cry wolf effect when we think of habituation. So if you have the same thing occurring over and over and over again, over time there tends to be a decrease in the response to that stimulus. And what they believe is the ultimate causation behind habituation is that it enables animals to disregard things that are not important stimuli. So, for example, you see the picture in the lower right here where there are horses next to the highway. So, at first, the approach of a car would cause these horses to go off running and interrupt their eating. But over time, as they begin to associate the stimulus of the car as nothing dangerous, nothing that's actually going to harm them, then they become habituated to that stimulus and they tend to ignore it. So it does have a beneficial effect. When we think of learned behavior, we also think of cognition and problem solving. So cognition is defined as the awareness, reasoning, memory, or judgment. And problem solving is changing behavior to overcome obstacles. And there are many animals that are able to do this, but we typically have done most of our studies with primates who are very good at both of these. So they both have cognition, but they also are very good at problem solving. So cognition is the most complex form of learning, but many animal species, including insects, appear to exhibit cognition. For example, there was one experiment where honeybees were exposed to a sample color, and when they were rewarded for flying into the arm of a maze that was marked with that same color. And after repeated trials, the bees were challenged with black and white patterns. So after they encountered a sample black and white pattern of bars, the bee could then choose between one arm with the same pattern or an arm with a different pattern. And the bees in the first group most often chose the arm with the same pattern, whereas those in the second group typically chose the arm with a different pattern. So honeybees, as a conclusion to this experiment, it was apparent that they could distinguish on the basis of same and different, which is an essential cognitive behavior. Research has also shown that honeybees can learn to distinguish between human faces, so they'll recognize the same and different in a human face. So this is a prime example of cognition among insects. Now, more highly developed learning is problem solving because it's a cognitive activity that requires the animal to come up with a method to proceed from one place or state to another in the face of a real or apparent obstacle. So, for example, if a chimpanzee is placed in a room with a lot of boxes on the floor and a banana that's hung high up, and that's actually, you can see that behind this little thing here, they will actually stack up the boxes in order to get to that banana. So they solve that obstacle, that problem of getting the banana by using problem-solving cognition. Another example is, let's see if it's on the next one here. Nope. Well, actually it is here. Another problem-solving cognition has to do with social learning among vervet monkeys. And these young monkeys learn from older monkeys to give, which means to actually make alarm calls or respond to alarm calls for different predators. So they'll have predators that both live on the ground and live up above them. So the vervet monkeys are typically in trees, and there are snakes, which would be found on the floor of their environment, which would eat them. And there are other predators on the floor that would eat them. And there are also birds of prey that will eat them from above. So for each of these different predators, the vervet monkeys have a different alarm call. And so the young monkeys have to learn how to both give that call and give the correct call and also to respond to that call, to know whether they need to climb higher in the tree, get off the ground, or climb down from the tree if the predator is coming from above. So this is a very adaptive skill for them to learn. The problem that they have to overcome, where problem solving comes into this, is that a young monkey might make the wrong call. So let's say there is an eagle or a hawk that is flying above them, and the young monkey gives the alarm call for the snake that's on the ground. And so if all of the adults were to respond to that call, they would rush up the tree and be eaten, be easier prey for the flying predator. So what these monkeys have come up with is they will only respond to an alarm call from another adult. So even if a young vervet monkey makes the call, there has to be a second call given by an adult that is recognized by the community or by the population of monkeys as an actually verified alarm. So that's how they overcome problem solving, and they use a form of learning called social learning. They learn through the observation of others, and among us, we would say that's the root of our culture. Another example of this is young chimpanzees learn to crack palm nuts with stones by copying older chimpanzees. And you also see this behavior among otters. If you ever go to Monterey, you'll see otters cracking um, shelled fish or shelled organisms on their chest using a rock. And so if there's a young otter, it learns that behavior as well by observing its mother doing the same thing. This is a quick video here showing the chimp cracking a nut, but you can actually go on to Pearson and look at this video. It's something I'm sure you've even seen if you've watched any nature shows. What I'd like you to do is pause right now and summarize in your own words what you just learned. I want you to be able to define and give an example of at least 3 types of learned behaviors. So give the organism, give the learned behavior, and what type of learning is actually occurring. And also try and come up with some ultimate causation for that behavior. Make sure you pause because I'm going on. So another type of social behavior is communication among animals, which can take the form of both visual, chemical, auditory. There are all sorts of ways that animals communicate and give signals to one another. This in the red box here is the EK is essential knowledge. So from the College Board, as you guys know, the learning that you are expected to master is broken into essential knowledge. And so this one is 3.1. And what they want you to understand is that individuals act on information and communicate it to others. So you need to be able to give some practical examples of how does this actually occur. So we're going to look at these different interactions. First, communication, then agonistic behaviors, the concept of dominance, hierarchy, cooperation, and altruistic behavior. A signal is something that is transmitted from one animal to another, and it acts as a stimulus that's going to result in some sort of behavior. So it's going to guide the other animal's behavior, either in a different species or within the same species. So either among the community of organisms in the ecosystem or within the population. The transmission and reception of these signals is what we define as communication between animals.